No other law enforcement agency in the world has more hands-on experience fighting terrorism than the Diplomatic Security Service at the U.S. Department of State. Diplomatic security agents are trained to be part diplomat, part street cop, part security officer, and part counterterrorism specialist. When you combine this philosophy with real-life operational experience in almost 200 different countries, you get one of the most professional organizations in the world.
Transnational terrorism is a global threat. The United States, its citizens and facilities, are often caught in the crosshairs of the world's most violent and fanatical terrorist groups.
It's clear that America has, since the fall of the Soviet Union, become the only superpower. There is clearly a larger presence of Americans overseas, thus subjecting more Americans than at any previous era to attacks by those who would be so inclined to do so.
1/3 of all the terrorist incidents that have occurred, around the world have been directed against American citizens or American diplomatic facilities and personnel.
There are many people out there who hate us with a passion, and they will do about anything in their power to disrupt, hurt, take advantage of the United States.
April 1983. The U.S. Embassy in Beirut is attacked by a suicide bomber. 49 lives are lost and 120 are wounded. The bombing was the opening salvo of a brutal campaign of terrorist attacks against U.S. facilities and personnel around the world.
And I think that was maybe the first real significant bombing where a truck bomb had been used and driven into the embassy. In fact, it was driven straight into the Marine booth, the center of the embassy. I, of course, only saw the aftermath of that bombing, but it was scary because at that point, I think they knew they could get to us. Then I think the Marine bombing, 241 Marines killed in October of '83, the same year, showed that they were planning and they were carrying out these bombings, and we were vulnerable to those bombings. And I think that was something that was a change in thinking on their part, that we weren't so invulnerable. They were able to hit us and they were able to hurt us.
September 1984. Terrorists strike again. This time the U.S. Embassy Annex in East Beirut. Seconds before the detonation of a massive truck bomb, DSS Special Agent Al Bigler, one of the embassy's security officers, went to investigate the sounds of automatic gunfire.
Just before I got to the door, the explosion took place in front of the embassy, and it caused the glass aluminum frame door to hit me, and I frankly then I went across the room. I think at first I was considered dead, and so there are varying stories. I wasn't awake to see it, but the sense was that I was dead, that I was covered up somehow. And then I was moved, I understand, to a wagon that was carrying the bodies away, and somehow during the time I was in that wagon I moved, and someone saw me move. So they then took me out of the wagon that was heading for the morgue, and I went instead to the hospital.
The reverberations of the Beirut bombings were immediately felt in Washington, D.C. Advisory panels and commissions were formed with one objective: how to protect the thousands of American lives and facilities abroad from indiscriminate acts of terror. In November 1985, the Diplomatic Security Service was formed as a federal law enforcement arm of the U.S. State Department. With over 1,200 special agents operating in the United States and around the world, this unique group of law enforcement and security specialists protect U.S. facilities and diplomats abroad. They are charged with the protection of the Secretary of State and foreign dignitaries traveling within the United States. They are trained to repel all types of assassination attempts and attacks.
We've had instances where our people have been running motorcades through the hinterlands of some of the countries in Africa, and they've come under attack. They've had to return fire. They've gotten their ambassadors, their protectees out of those situations. So our guys are out there and they're facing it every day, and they're doing a great job.
Training for such an attack under realistic conditions is vital for the Diplomatic Security Service. In this scenario, we are taken inside the world of the Mobile Security Division, Diplomatic Security's elite tactical force as they train to counter an attack on a motorcade. Although the terrorists have secured the high ground and have assumed a series of advantageous firing positions, MSD operators are able to hold the attackers at bay and safely evacuate the targeted diplomat.
Wrist turn out. Weapon take away. 1 count. Stand by. Ready.
The Diplomatic Security Service has developed a unique defensive tactics program
Scan and assess. Scan and assess.
designed to control assailants at close range.
It is very important, at least through my eyes, to ensure that our people are able to defend themselves first if situations start deteriorating.
Stand by. Ready.
So it's a lot of weapons retention, weapon takeaway, takedowns, controlling the subject too.
The Diplomatic Security Service's challenge is to take targets off the scope of terrorism and to have people poised to respond, react, prevent is the ultimate challenge for us.
Right, walking formation.
Diplomats are tempting targets for terrorists. In this scenario, an assassin strikes at close range.
Scan and assess. Scan and assess.
You never know when this thing's going to happen, and hopefully, I hope that, a situation like an attempted assassination is not going to go down. But if it does go down, then we want to make sure that our people are ready basically to handle themselves, plus get the protectee out of the air safely.
The Diplomatic Security Service's Special Tactical Force, MSD, is the elite of the service. These operators are highly trained and experienced in special operations and counter-assault tactics.
The Mobile Security Division in the Diplomatic Security Service is our elite corps.
The Mobile Security Division has special training in providing security support as tactical support teams to the Secretary of State and to high-threat protective details.
They're the folks in the muscle car who provide that extra firepower should it be needed, God forbid.
These Kevlar-clad operators are often on the front line, prepared to respond to any type of terrorist attack.
The most frightening thing about terrorism is it can come in a moment's notice. It can come pretty much anywhere. And so we must be prepared to meet that threat head-on in whatever direction it takes.
In this training scenario, a protective detail of DS agents must respond to a sniper attack upon their protectee. The motorcade's exit will be blocked by the arrival of additional terrorists. To evacuate the dignitary, a DSS backup vehicle has been positioned nearby.
The Mobile Security Division are able to respond to an attack, allowing the protective detail itself to lead. So they're specially trained and specially equipped in order to take on the attacker. So now the attacker has to face these guys, and they're not able to attack the principal who's moving out of the threat. I think as a whole, looking at the numerous types of threat that exist out there, that there's not a better trained group of people in the U.S. government. Just to look at them, you might not want to try to attack them. And I know how many threats we have against the principles that we protect. And I can tell you that it's significant and it's dangerous. If there is an attack, they're the end result. They are there to take on that attack.
Coming in. Clear.
When the scenario as it unfolded, it was a situation where a shot was fired. The missing principal, the dignitary, was rushed into the car very quickly. The motorcade started to move away. Another terrorist car came by, blocked the access, got out, and they fired a machine gun. Meanwhile, you had our tactical support team engaging the terrorists. You had a regular protective detail engaging the terrorists as well. The terrorist that was up above sniping went down rather quickly, and then we had a secondary attack that was thwarted by our tactical support team. Protective detail, since the car was down, had to now evacuate the principal out of that car and move him back into the establishment. Once they got in the establishment, they were going to race him out to a secondary vehicle, a stash car, and move away from the scene.
Anybody coming into the Diplomatic Security Service needs to be prepared for the uniqueness of the job that we do. This is a different federal law enforcement job. It is not a job where you work your entire career in one of several cities in the United States. We have about half of our people posted around the world, and they are out there every single day of the week and have been for years facing constant danger.
'95 in Bosnia was a very interesting time. I was literally the first State Department employee to have paper orders assigning me to the embassy in Bosnia. And I literally was the first one to go in. At that time, the war was raging. The city was completely under siege. The Serbs had control of the entire routes into the city.
On August 19, 1995, Special Agent Hargraves was escorting a peacekeeping delegation to Sarajevo when tragedy struck their convoy of armored personnel carriers.
We were coming back in an armored personnel carrier driven by UN French soldiers. The road gave way from underneath us, and the personnel carrier rolled down the hill 800 to 1,000 yards and came to a rest. All of us were injured. Several of us were injured severely enough that they couldn't move or get assistance. I had several broken ribs, had several fractured vertebrae, both hands, and were severely damaged. I had head wounds, face wounds. I knew I was hurt. When I crawled out of the APC, I could feel the injuries on my back, and I knew I was hurt, but I also heard the cries for help, and I knew I had to go back in. I pulled one individual out, and as I went back in to get another individual, the APC exploded from a fire that had gotten started in the accident as it rolled down the hill, and it basically engulfed the entire APC.
Badly burned and seriously injured, Hargraves survived along with 3 others. Despite his efforts, 5 people, including an American ambassador, lost their lives. Hargraves was acknowledged for his selfless actions by many, including President Bill Clinton. For his exceptional display of bravery and courage, Hargraves was awarded the Medal of Valor and presented with the flag, which flew above the American embassy in Sarajevo.
30 plus of our agents of the service have been awarded the Award for Valor by the State Department. These are people who have put their lives in harm's way to protect others. I'm privileged as director of the Diplomatic Security Service to work with people who are loyal and dedicated and selfless.
The level of dedication of my fellow agents in MSD and throughout the Bureau of Diplomatic Security is outstanding. I came from a police department and had a law enforcement background before I came in to the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, and have worked and been very close with a number of people, but I have never experienced the dedication that I've seen in the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. This is a way of life. It's not a job. It's literally, you live this job.
Just before 4 a.m. on February 26, 1993, a yellow Econoline Ryder rental van carrying a 1,200-pound bomb began its journey from New Jersey en route to the World Trade Center. By 8 a.m., the van with its deadly cargo was maneuvering through Manhattan traffic towards its target. The van pulled into the underground parking complex, where 4 20-foot fuses were lit. 12 minutes later, there was a massive explosion.
February 26, 1993, it was about midday. I was doing criminal history checks on the Treasury Enforcement Communication System when the line went dead.
When the bomb first went off in New York, I was posted to the American Embassy in Lisbon. And when I first saw it on TV, I recall it vividly. I saw this and initially did not know what to think of it. I mean, it looked, with all the people coming out of that building, to be some sort of major fire.
We realized there were lots of rescue units going past the building towards the Trade Center. We made some phone calls over to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. They told us that what initially was reported as a boiler blast could in fact have been a bomb.
As you continue to watch and follow the reports, I mean, it was very evident that we had undergone a major terrorist attack.
6 people died in the explosion, and over 1,000 were injured. If the attack had gone as planned, one tower would have toppled into the other, causing upwards of 250,000 casualties.
This bomb went off in a sub-basement, and it blew out several floors above and below and made basically a big hole, to imagine 250 feet wide by 70, 100 feet tall hole in this building that used to be 8 or 9 floors of parking. Cars, garages, air conditioning rooms, blown into parts, and people that were missing for months before they finally identified people that they knew were in that area and found them.
The World Trade Center bombing did more than destroy concrete and metal. It tore a hole in the fabric of the American psyche.
And it was sobering, to say the least, to have an attack such as this committed on U.S. soil at such a target.
Fanatics had targeted Americans before, but always on foreign soil. Between 1979 and 1984, there were nearly 100 terrorist attacks against Americans, as embassies were torched, blown up, and seized, and some 300 Americans were killed.
If you look back to the 70s and 80s, we were looking at kidnappings against our personnel. You're looking at assassination attempts against our personnel. This was the primary threat that we were facing. I think that changed in the early 80s, where we start to see threats against our facilities, the threat of car attacks. Certainly I'm concerned that the threat we now see perhaps is coming domestically and is targeting perhaps our people and personnel here, and that is a big concern.
Starting with the sparsest of leads, investigators from various government agencies and law enforcement, including the DSS, began piecing together the facts of the attack.
The minute that bomb went off, we had people from our New York field office working in concert with the FBI to track down those responsible for the bombing.
DSS investigations into visa and passport fraud led to the incarceration of several suspects. The alleged mastermind behind the bombing, Ramzi Youssef, had escaped to Pakistan and then to the Philippines. Determined to continue his war against the United States, Youssef devised a series of attacks that would have made the bombing of the World Trade Center seem insignificant.
The police in the Philippines were summoned to a house that had a fire. Fire department came in and saw what they believed were bomb-making type things, so called the police. The police came in and found documents and everything and notified U.S. authorities, and that is when myself, the Bureau, picked up and pretty much went en masse. We went to the Philippines.
While cooking a witch's brew of chemicals, Youssef's apartment in the Philippines had caught fire. Once again, Youssef escaped. But investigators soon uncovered evidence of an unimaginable terrorist attack, which Youssef codenamed Project Bojinka. Youssef and 5 accomplices were to plant bombs timed to explode simultaneously on 12 U.S. airliners over the Pacific, causing the death of over 4,000 people. Items in Youssef's Manila bomb factory also indicated that he and accomplices were planning to assassinate Pope John Paul II and President Bill Clinton. At the same time, a confidential informant approached U.S. State Department officials.
He was very concerned for his safety. He was very concerned for the safety of others in his family as well. He had a bag in his hand, a paper bag in his hand that appeared to have something wrapped up inside of it.
It was a news magazine with information about the manhunt for Youssef and a reward offered by the Diplomatic Security Service of $2 million for information leading to Youssef's arrest.
The rewards program is something that the Protective Intelligence Division has run literally since its inception in 1984. Since its inception, we have paid out approximately $6 million in some 20-plus cases.
The most important thing about the program that the American public needs to understand is that we offer rewards for information on any act of international terrorism directed against American facilities, American properties, or American people. We go back as far as the mid-'80s, TWA 847, we go to Pan Am 103. We've averaged 2 or 3 campaigns a year, but to give you an idea of how serious the terrorist threat has become lately, we've come up with about 15 different campaigns just in the last 12 to 15 months here.
This time, the rewards program delivered America's most wanted fugitive to the doorstep of the DSS.
The informant tells us that Yusuf is staying at Sukasa Guest House in Islamabad. We arrive there, the informant goes into the Sukasa Guest House. He stays there for no more than 15 minutes. Walks out, we spot him, he goes halfway across the street. Halfway across the street, he was supposed to take his baseball cap off and rub his hands through his hair. And that was his signal to us that indeed he had met with Yusuf. Yusuf was in the room that he claimed he was in. Just like we had planned, takes the ball cap off, runs his fingers through his hair, puts it back on, and goes over to where he's residing. He's living in an apartment across the street.
The raid team, including Pakistani military and police personnel, descended upon Yusuf's motel room. Within seconds, a DSS special agent came face to face with the world's most wanted terrorist.
The commander of our raid team asked me to identify Yusuf, in which case I had a photograph that we had in our files, which actually had also been in several publications, up to his face. I said at that point in time, that's him.
One of the most dangerous terrorists in the world was returned to the United States to face justice. On February 12, 1997, Ramzi Yusuf was sentenced to 240 years in solitary confinement for his role in the World Trade Center bombing. In capturing Yusuf, DSS had scored a significant victory in the campaign against terrorism. The war, however, was far from over. Thousands of Americans represent the United States government in over 260 diplomatic missions around the world. Hundreds of DSS agents shield these diplomatic outposts from terrorist attacks.
Egypt is a beguiling place. Everyone who comes here knows how friendly Egyptians are, has a good time as tourists. There's a lot to see. But Egypt is also a high-threat post, not just for the United States, but for many Western countries as well.
With over 1,500 employees and dependents, the U.S. Embassy in Cairo is a target-rich environment for terrorists.
U.S. Embassy Cairo is a blast-resistant facility specifically built to withstand the type of terrorist attacks that victimized the United States in the early 1980s, such as the Marine barracks bombing in Lebanon and also the bombing of the embassy in Beirut. It's blast-resistant, it's reinforced. We have cameras, we have delta barriers which prevent trucks from ramming into the embassy. We also have new technology which allows us to detect traces of explosives on persons or vehicles from a distance. Plus we have mirrors the guards are trained to use to check the engines underneath the chassis of a vehicle. And we also have good cooperation from the Egyptian police. They provide security around the perimeter of our embassy. We also have a large contingent of Marines.
We are blessed in Cairo with a terrific regional security staff, Department of State Diplomatic Service, which also liaises well with all of the other elements at post from the Department of Defense and other agencies. I rely upon our regional security officer as my key and primary security advisor.
Well, the regional security officer is the ambassador's primary advisor on security matters. And as part of that role, we're responsible for official and non-official Americans and their safety, or what they can do to improve their general security on a day-to-day basis.
Security inside the embassy is provided by a combined effort of DSS agents and special detachments from the U.S. Marine Corps. Operators from the Mobile Security Division routinely travel to embassies around the world, like Cairo, to train with the Marines and prepare them for possible terrorist attacks.
We run scenarios, we run react drills, and they will respond accordingly. We set up an environment where we will stage types of attacks. It may be a bomb attack, it may be a chem bio incident, it may be a mob, it may be an intruder. It allows them to develop responses that are clear and crisp.
In this scenario, a Marine is dispatched to investigate a disturbance. The Marine is attacked and repeatedly stabbed by 2 intruders who take the Marine's sidearm and escape into the heart of the facility.
Attention the Marine House, attention the Marine House. We got an intruder on the compound. We have an intruder on the compound. All Marines.
If an intruder was to enter the building and we were to notice him on camera, we would immediately notify Post 1. Post 1 and Post 4 would notify the Marine House. The Marine House being located on compound, the Marines will quickly be brought down. They go down to the REACT room, they man their gear, and the individual that will command the REACT, the sergeant of the guard, or whoever's on post as a sergeant of the guard, commands the REACT force, and he runs the entire drill. And they have designated search areas. They would start in those areas, and they would try to contain the individual in a certain area.
Alpha team, over here. All right, listen up, just a situation. We have an intruder in the building. Post 5 was attacked by two intruders. One have a knife, one have a gun. The mission is, Charlie team, I want you to go investigate Post 5. He's by the ACS. Go.
Using a ballistic shield for cover, the squad advances toward the downed Marines. For safety, they move in stacked or tight formation, while a combination of Remington shotguns and Beretta 9mm pistols are strategically positioned to provide 360-degree protection.
Bravo team, lock and finish.
The Marines must be able to deal tactically with the situation before the intruders can fortify themselves in a location and potentially take hostages. Charlie Squad quickly but cautiously drags the injured Marine to a secure location where first aid can be administered. The two remaining squads of Marines have quickly cornered the two armed intruders.
Here we go. Keep the knife away, keep the knife away. Come along. Put your arms up. Put your legs. Free! Hands up. Not like the gun, stop. Get on your knees slowly. Put your arms on the deck. Split. Keep them down, I'm gonna call it in.
The REACT drills are good for us for various reasons. We have no idea what can happen, so we have to be prepared for just about anything. The only way that we can be fully prepared is to always practice. Make it as difficult as possible for things to happen on your watch. There are Marines that were here before us that have done their job. I would be remiss if I allowed it to happen on my watch.
The most frightening thing for us about terrorism is that the bad guy always has the advantage. We have to be 100% every day, every moment in order to keep them at bay, whereas they can try and probe and have the advantage of the date, time, and place.
At 10:25 a.m., on the morning of Friday, August 7, 1998, in the Kenyan capital of Nairobi, two terrorists drove a van carrying a massive bomb to the rear of the American embassy.
I was in my office, which is on the 3rd level. I was all set to actually go downstairs, but I was stopped by a colleague who came in and asked if I had a few minutes to discuss a matter we'd both been dealing with. While we sat and talked, that's when we heard what sounded like grenades. I looked out the window and saw, looked like a couple of hundred Kenyans running very fast and yelling. That's when I knew there was a problem. I said, I'll be back, I've got to see what this problem is. And that's when the blast occurred. It was totally dark. There was no lights, there was dust, and there was smoke. We took the nearest stairwell, heading down. There was a hole in the wall and a large fire going. A couple of people thought the stairwell was gone, but I could pretty much see that it was still intact. Getting these people out was kind of difficult because some were blast damaged. but with the help of those that could walk and carry people, we got them out.
The force of the explosion was enormous. Damage to the embassy was massive. Flying glass from the surrounding office buildings decapitated dozens on the streets, and flames from the blast shot through passing crosstown buses, incinerating all on board.
On the morning of the bombing, I flew with the team of DS agents that morning back to Kenya to coordinate the DS response for the post there. I saw a large building in shambles. I saw many rescue workers. I saw, many injured. It was just tremendous disbelief and shock. I really don't want to go back there in my mind.
Shockingly, moments after the explosion in Kenya, terrorists struck at the American embassy 450 miles away in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. A powerful bomb, hidden inside a vehicle parked near a water tanker, exploded just outside the sprawling United States compound. The explosions killed 11 people and seriously injured 85. In Nairobi, the death toll was 213 people, with over 5,000 wounded.
Nothing can really prepare you for the reality. The trauma of seeing people you just said good morning to, now they're no longer alive. I knew virtually everyone that was killed, and it was a personal loss. Detonating a bomb in order to prove a point or to influence a political decision is, to me, just plain insane. And I'm glad that I'm on the terrorist task force in order to continue working against people like this.
DSS agents dispatched to Africa were instrumental in gathering evidence and searching for the bombers. Authorities believed a vast terrorist network, guided by a shadowy figure named Osama bin Laden, was responsible for the attacks. Bin Laden's terrorist network is known as Al-Qaeda, or the base. This base of operations was originally established during the Afghan war against the occupying Soviet forces. Born in Saudi Arabia and reportedly worth hundreds of millions of dollars, bin Laden was among the tens of thousands of volunteers from around the world who marched into battle against the invading Red Army. After 10 bloody years and 25,000 casualties, the Soviets retreated. In the eyes of bin Laden, the new enemy was the West, led by the United States. Authorities now believe that members of bin Laden's network were responsible for the World Trade Center bombing.
It's a huge mistake to underestimate any enemy, and this is especially true of Osama bin Laden, who commands a force of over 5,000 Afghan Arabs, so-called because these are individuals from 28 different countries who fought the Soviets in Afghanistan. These individuals are now placed in 29 different countries that we know of. With operatives all over the world, it would be very naive to think that Osama bin Laden doesn't have people in the United States.
Several suspects connected to the bombings are still at large, including Osama bin Laden. With a multi-million-dollar bounty on his head, the question remains, will bin Laden and his accomplices be apprehended before they strike again? Intelligence and law enforcement agencies, such as the DSS, suspect bin Laden and other terrorist groups now possess the unthinkable, biological and chemical weapons. March 20th, 1995. 5 terrorists released sarin gas, one of the most lethal chemical weapons known to man, on Tokyo's subway system. 11 people died. 5,000 were injured.
Tokyo attack was the first really serious attack by a terrorist group using chemical weapons. Even now, there's some debate in the intelligence community and among subject matter experts as to just how likely it is, how easy it is, for instance, to procure chemical or biological weapons or to make them. But what nobody debates, I don't think, is at this stage is that there are groups out there that are willing to use these weapons.
The hedge against your worst nightmare is to have a plan. That plan includes your responses to chemical, biological weapons, should they be deployed.
In this training scenario, the Mobile Security Division responds to a chemical attack against the residence of a high-ranking diplomat protected by the DSS.
We're ready to go.
In an instant, a quiet residential area can be transformed into a scene of death and horror. The agent posted outside the residence is immediately overcome by the effects of the nerve agent. The toxins quickly make their way into the building's intake systems, sealing the fate of those inside. For the members of the Mobile Security Division, executing a rescue operation in such a deadly environment can be life-threatening.
We've developed a process which we feel will help safeguard our individuals while they're out on emergency missions or working protective operations. This involves chemical protection equipment, decontamination procedures, looking at detection systems, and containment system.
The tactical team moves quickly to save their protectee. 2 agents have succumbed to the lethal effects of the nerve gas, leaving the ambassador still alive but clinging to life. The tactical team performs a quick medical assessment of the stricken diplomat while placing a gas mask on his head.
You can't work or be effective in a poisonous atmosphere. Since this attack basically was attacked against your airwaves, if you can protect your breathing, you can go a long way to protecting yourself in the attack and help other people.
Once the gas mask is securely in place, agents supply the protectee with a series of atropine injections in order to counter the effects of the chemical agent. The protectee is quickly moved to an outside location where an MSD medic attempts to stabilize the victim.
We haven't seen the old things go away. Kidnapping still happen. Truck bombs are still our biggest worry. This is another one that we have to plan for.
I clearly do not believe that the terrorist threat that we're currently under is going to decline in the next 10 years. I think that's the collective opinion of the intelligence community also.
There's an extreme challenge out there for the next 25, 30 years, and there's no end in sight. We don't even see a light at the end of the tunnel.
Our opponents are tough, they're smart, they're unrelenting, and we have to be the same. We have to be better than them.